I'm Eleanor, 35, and I spent 15 years working tirelessly to build my dream luxury villa on the coast. My sister Stephanie and I were once inseparable, sharing everything from clothes to secrets. But nothing prepared me for that surreal moment at my parents' anniversary when she stood up, champagne in hand, and announced to our entire family that I would be giving her my villa as a wedding gift. The silence that followed was deafening. Before I dive into this wild story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I handled the most shocking demand of my life. Growing up in Boston, Stephanie and I shared a modest 3-bedroom home with our parents, Rebecca and William. Despite being 5 years apart, we were close as children, though our personalities couldn't have been more different. My parents worked hard. Dad as an insurance agent and Mom as a high school English teacher, instilling in us the value of earning what we received. From the age of 10, I was obsessed with buildings. While other kids plastered their walls with boy band posters, mine featured Frank Lloyd Wright designs and Mediterranean villas. I'd spend hours sketching buildings, imagining spaces that could transform how people lived. Mom would find me surrounded by graph paper and colored pencils, meticulously drawing floor plans for houses I swore I'd build someday. Eleanor has her head in the clouds, Dad would say with a mix of pride and concern, but at least they're architecturally sound clouds. Stephanie, on the other hand, was our family's social butterfly. She collected friends effortlessly and expected the world to accommodate her wishes. When I saved my allowance for drafting supplies, she spent hers immediately on whatever caught her eye, then somehow charmed our parents into advancing her next week's allowance too. "You need to lighten up, Ellie," she'd tell me when I declined shopping trips to study. "All work and no play makes for a boring sister." Architecture school was my dream, but it came with a steep price tag. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: barista mornings, campus library afternoons, and waitressing weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Meanwhile, Stephanie attended community college sporadically, changing majors whenever courses became too demanding. During my second year, I met Natalie in a structural engineering class. She became the sister in spirit who understood my ambition. While Stephanie would call with her latest dramas, Natalie would bring me coffee during all-nighters before big projects were due. "You're going to design something magnificent someday," Natalie would say, "and I'll get to say I knew you when you were surviving on ramen and determination." After graduation, I started at the bottom of a prestigious architecture firm, making coffee runs and organizing blueprints. Promotions came through sacrifice. I missed family gatherings for deadlines, canceled dates when clients needed revisions, and postponed vacations repeatedly. My marriage to Richard, a fellow architect I met at a conference, lasted just 3 years. He wanted children. I wanted to establish my career first. We parted with mutual respect, but lingering regret. "You're married to your blueprints," he said kindly on our last day together. "Maybe someday you'll find someone who fits into that world." The divorce pushed me further into my work. By 30, I had opened Eleanor Watson Designs, specializing in sustainable luxury homes. While my business thrived, Stephanie bounced between retail jobs, always quitting before things got too serious. Our parents stepped in repeatedly to cover her rent when she prioritized vacations over bills. Through it all, one dream remained constant: building my own home. Not just any home, a masterpiece that embodied everything I believed about architecture. A place where every corner reflected intention and purpose. A sanctuary earned through years of sacrifice. This wasn't just a building project. It was the physical manifestation of my life's philosophy. Every commission I completed, every bonus I earned, went into my villa fund. Friends invited me to expensive dinners. I suggested coffee instead. Colleagues upgraded their cars. I kept my reliable sedan an extra 5 years. Each decision was a brick in the foundation of my future home. "You only get one life," I'd remind myself on difficult days. Build it exactly as you want it. After a 3-year search, I found it. 2 acres of oceanfront property with a southern exposure that would flood the house with natural light throughout the day. The moment I stood on that bluff, listening to waves crash against the rocks below, I knew this was where I would build my sanctuary. The property cost nearly all my savings, but I couldn't compromise on location. Good design begins with the right setting, and this view would be worth eating ramen for another year, if necessary. I spent 6 months designing the villa, working evenings and weekends while running my firm during the day. Every square inch was considered, reconsidered, and perfected. I wanted minimal environmental impact with maximum comfort, incorporating passive solar design with cutting-edge smart home technology. The heart of the home would be a great room with 20-foot ceilings and glass walls facing the ocean. I designed a chef's kitchen with a marble island long enough to seat 8, knowing I'd finally host the dinner parties I'd been too busy to throw. The primary suite would include a private terrace where I could drink morning coffee while watching the sunrise. Most importantly, I included a spacious art studio with north-facing windows, the perfect light for the painting hobby I'd abandoned during architecture school. When I presented my plans to the local building department, the nightmare began. The environmental impact review took 4 months longer than promised. The Coastal Commission required 3 separate hearings. My property tax assessment came in shockingly high, requiring an appeal that dragged on for months. This is why people buy existing homes, my father commented when I vented my frustrations during a rare family dinner. Stephanie's apartment seems perfectly fine, and she just signed a lease without all this hassle. What Dad didn't understand was that Stephanie's perfectly fine apartment was actually subsidized by our parents, who covered her security deposit and occasionally helped with rent when she overspent on weekend trips to New York. To finance construction, I sold my downtown apartment and moved into a tiny rental studio. I took out a construction loan with terms that kept me awake at night, knowing any significant delay could devastate my finances. When material costs suddenly increased, I picked up consulting work on weekends to cover the difference. Mike, my contractor, became both ally and occasional adversary during the 18-month construction process. A gruff man with 30 years of experience, he appreciated my attention to detail but pushed back when my perfectionism threatened the timeline. "Listen, Eleanor," he said one rainy afternoon as we argued about the precise angle of the kitchen skylight. "I understand you want everything perfect. But perfect doesn't mean changing the plans every week. Perfect means knowing when something is right enough to move forward." His words stuck with me, becoming a mantra when decision fatigue threatened to overwhelm me. The challenges were relentless. A concrete pour was delayed when the mixer broke down, pushing back the entire schedule. Custom windows arrived with the wrong tint, requiring a reorder and 12-week delay. During a particularly harsh winter storm, wind damaged a section of partially installed roofing, requiring costly repairs. Each setback tested my resolve. There were nights I sat in my empty rental, surrounded by blueprints and budget spreadsheets, questioning everything. Had I taken on too much? Was I foolish to pour everything into the stream? Natalie talked me off the ledge more than once. "Remember why you started," she'd remind me. "This isn't just a house. It's your manifesto in glass and concrete." The infinity pool nearly broke me, both financially and emotionally. 3 different companies tried and failed to achieve the seamless edge effect I wanted, where the water appeared to merge with the ocean beyond. The 4th attempt succeeded but cost nearly twice my original budget for that feature alone. But slowly, inexorably, my vision took physical form. The moment Mike handed me the keys, stating gruffly that final inspection had passed, I couldn't speak through my tears. That night, I slept on a mattress on the floor of the primary bedroom, falling asleep to moonlight reflecting off the ocean through floor-to-ceiling windows. My villa was finally complete. 5,200 square feet of architectural passion featuring 4 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a professional kitchen, art studio, home office, media room, and the infinity pool that had nearly driven me to madness. The great room's retractable glass wall opened completely, erasing the boundary between indoor and outdoor living. Sustainable features included solar panels, rainwater collection, and a geothermal heating system. This wasn't just a luxury home. It was the physical embodiment of 15 years of sacrifice, persistence, and unwavering focus. Every doorknob, light switch, and floorboard represented a choice made with intention. This was my masterpiece. My relationship with Stephanie had always been complicated by our different approaches to life. While I saved meticulously and planned years ahead, Stephanie lived perpetually in the moment, expecting safety nets to materialize when her choices led to difficulties. Growing up, I was the built-in babysitter, tutor, and problem solver. When Stephanie forgot her science project was due, I'd stay up all night helping her complete it. When she missed curfew, I'd cover for her with our parents. This pattern continued into adulthood, with higher stakes and greater consequences. Ellie, I maxed out my credit card again, became a monthly phone call during her 20s. I'd lecture about budgeting while transferring money to her account, telling myself it was a temporary loan, although we both knew she rarely repaid me. Our parents unintentionally reinforced this dynamic. You're doing so well, Eleanor. Stephanie just needs a little more time to find her path, Mom would say, not recognizing how this perpetuated the imbalance between us. When Stephanie called to announce her engagement to James, I was genuinely happy for her. James came from a wealthy family and worked in commercial real estate development. At 33, he was 8 years older than Stephanie and seemed to provide the stability she needed. He's amazing, Ellie, she gushed over the phone. You'll love him. He's actually interested in architecture too. You two will have so much to talk about. We met for lunch the following week, where Stephanie showed off her impressive diamond ring and immediately launched into wedding plans. We're thinking 200 guests minimum, she explained, scrolling through Pinterest boards on her phone. James wants it to be the event of the season. That sounds extensive, I replied carefully. Have you set a budget? Stephanie waved dismissively. James says we'll figure that out later. But actually, I was hoping you might help with the venue. Your firm must have connections with some amazing spaces. This was typical Stephanie. Assuming my professional contacts were resources for her personal use. Nevertheless, I agreed to introduce her to a few venue managers I knew. This quickly expanded to requests for help with floral arrangements, catering recommendations, and eventually, the entire design concept for the wedding. You have such good taste, Ellie, she flattered. And this way, you won't have to spend money on a wedding gift. I should have established boundaries then, but old habits die hard. Soon I was spending weekends creating mood boards and sourcing vendors, work that would normally earn my firm thousands in consulting fees. Our parents were delighted by my involvement. It's wonderful to see you two so close again, Mom commented. You've been so busy with your career. We worried you and Stephanie were drifting apart. The translation was clear. My success had created distance, and it was my responsibility to bridge it by serving Stephanie's needs. As wedding planning progressed, James became increasingly present. He was charming but with an intensity that occasionally made me uncomfortable. During a dinner at my apartment, he asked pointed questions about my business, property values in my area, and my future investment plans. I attributed his interest to his real estate background. 2 months after their engagement, Stephanie and James joined me for dinner at my newly completed villa. It was their first visit, and I was excited to show them the culmination of my life's work. James walked through each room silently, noting features with an appraising eye that seemed more calculating than appreciative. This must have cost a fortune, he commented, running his hand along the custom kitchen countertop. It's absolutely perfect, Stephanie gushed, opening closets and drawers as if conducting an inventory. The master suite is bigger than my entire apartment. Over dessert, James casually mentioned that the wedding planner was struggling to find a venue that met their specifications. Everything's either too small, too plain, or already booked, Stephanie sighed dramatically. We might have to compromise on our vision. That's unfortunate, I sympathized, not yet recognizing the trap being laid. You know, James said thoughtfully, a private residence with character would actually be ideal. Something architecturally significant, with indoor-outdoor flow for the reception. The conversation moved on, but an uneasy feeling lingered. The next day, Stephanie called to ask if she could bring the wedding planner by just to see the villa. I reluctantly agreed, setting a precedent that would quickly spiral beyond my control. After the wedding planner's visit, Stephanie's requests escalated rapidly. Could they use the villa for engagement photos? Could the rehearsal dinner be held here? What about a pre-wedding brunch? Each time I hesitated, Stephanie employed emotional manipulation tactics that had worked throughout our childhood. I thought you'd be happy to help make my wedding special, she'd say, voice trembling. Mom and Dad think I'm asking too much, but I told them you'd never see it that way. Was I wrong about my own sister? Between managing my firm and finishing final details on the villa, I lacked the emotional energy for conflict. I agreed to the engagement photos and rehearsal dinner, drawing the line at hosting the actual wedding. The villa can't accommodate 200 people, I explained logically. The grounds aren't large enough, and the septic system isn't designed for that capacity. This technical explanation succeeded where emotional boundaries had failed. Stephanie reluctantly accepted this limitation, though her disappointment was palpable. As their wedding date approached, I noticed Stephanie bringing James to the villa with increasing frequency. They'd arrive unannounced for quick visits that stretched into hours, during which they'd measure spaces and take photos. James once arrived with a contractor friend who asked detailed questions about my electrical system and foundation. When I questioned these intrusions, Stephanie dismissed my concerns. We're just so inspired by what you've created, she assured me. James says your villa is exactly what we want for our forever home. That statement should have triggered alarm bells, but I was distracted by an important new commission. The warning signs continued to accumulate, unseen or ignored, until they became impossible to dismiss. 6 months into Stephanie and James's engagement, our parents celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. I offered to host a family dinner at my villa, seeing it as an opportunity to create positive memories in my new home. The evening began pleasantly enough. Mom cried when she saw the kitchen I designed with her cooking lessons in mind. Dad admired the smart home technology that controlled everything from lighting to security. Even Stephanie seemed genuinely happy, helping me serve appetizers while complimenting the seasonal flower arrangements. James arrived late, apologizing profusely while presenting my parents with an extravagant gift, a Caribbean cruise I knew they couldn't afford on their own. The gesture immediately cast my intimate dinner in a lesser light, though my parents insisted both gifts were equally thoughtful. Throughout dinner, I noticed Stephanie and James exchanging meaningful glances. She seemed nervous, repeatedly touching her engagement ring and giggling at inappropriate moments. James, meanwhile, kept steering conversation toward topics like generosity and family support. In my family, he explained, refilling wine glasses uninvited, we believe in setting each generation up for success. My parents gave us our first house as a wedding gift. My father shifted uncomfortably. That's very generous, but not everyone has those resources. True, James agreed with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But it's about priorities, isn't it? What we value most. After dessert, I served coffee in the great room, where floor-to-ceiling windows now reflected our images against the night sky. Stephanie suddenly stood, tapping her glass with a spoon. We have something special to share, she announced, her voice higher than usual. As you know, James and I have been struggling to find the perfect venue and home to begin our life together. My stomach tightened instinctively. Eleanor has been so supportive throughout our engagement, Stephanie continued, smiling at me with tears in her eyes. And now, she's giving us the most incredible wedding gift we could imagine. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at me, confusion evident on my parents' faces. Ellie is giving us this villa for our wedding and as our first home together, Stephanie exclaimed, clapping her hands excitedly. Isn't that the most generous thing you've ever heard? Time seemed to stop. I sat frozen, coffee cup suspended halfway to my lips, certain I'd misheard. Stephanie, what are you talking about? I finally managed, my voice barely audible. She laughed nervously. Don't be modest. It's too late to keep it a secret. We've already put the villa's address on the wedding invitations. James reached into his jacket pocket and produced an invitation. Sure enough, my property address was printed as the wedding venue, followed by "and future residence of the newlyweds" in elegant script. I wouldn't. Words failed me as realization dawned. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated ambush designed to pressure me into compliance before an audience. Stephanie, my father interjected cautiously, is this something you and Eleanor discussed privately? Not in so many words, she hedged, suddenly less confident. But Ellie knows how much we love this place. She's been letting us use it for wedding planning, measurements, everything. The wedding planner has already started booking vendors based on this location. I stood abruptly, blood rushing in my ears. I agreed to host your engagement photos and rehearsal dinner as a favor. I would never give you my home. I spent 15 years working toward this. How could you possibly think I would just hand it over? Stephanie's expression shifted from nervous excitement to wounded betrayal with practiced precision. But you have your business. You could build another house anytime. James and I need to establish ourselves, and you always said family comes first. Giving you occasional financial help is entirely different from giving you my home, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. This villa represents my life's work, Stephanie. It's not a wedding present. James placed a proprietary hand on my kitchen island. We're not asking for charity, Eleanor. We'd acknowledge your contribution prominently. Perhaps we could name it the Eleanor Wing, or something similar. The audacity left me speechless. My mother, ever the peacemaker, jumped in with a suggestion that only heightened my disbelief. Perhaps you girls could share the property? Eleanor, you travel so much for work. Stephanie and James could be primary residents, and you could have your own suite for visits. It was clear they discussed this scenario without me. My own parents were entertaining the idea of redistributing my hard-earned property to Stephanie, just as they'd redistributed attention, expectations, and resources throughout our childhood. This is absurd, I said flatly. There's nothing to discuss. This is my home, not a timeshare, not a wedding venue, and certainly not Stephanie's gift. I think this dinner is over. Stephanie burst into tears, her standard response when not getting her way. You've always been selfish. All those years I supported your dreams, and now you can't do this one thing for me? Supported my dreams, I repeated incredulously. When have you ever supported anything about my career? I bragged about you to everyone. I referred clients to you, she shouted through tears. You've referred exactly 0 clients to my firm, I corrected. And you've borrowed money from me consistently since college. James put his arm around Stephanie protectively. I think you're being unnecessarily cruel, Eleanor. Your sister is understandably emotional about her wedding plans. Perhaps we should discuss this when everyone is calmer. There's nothing to discuss, I repeated firmly. I need everyone to leave. Now. My father started to object, but something in my expression silenced him. As they gathered their belongings, Stephanie delivered her parting shot. You'll regret choosing a building over your family, Eleanor. I hope it keeps you warm at night. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone in the dream home that had suddenly become a battleground. The morning after the disastrous anniversary dinner, the siege began. My mother called first, her voice carefully modulated to convey disappointed neutrality. "Stephanie cried all night," she reported. "I understand your position, Eleanor, but surely there's some compromise possible? Your sister's wedding day is at stake." "Her wedding day, not her wedding decade," I replied, still struggling to process the audacity of their demand. "She can have her ceremony anywhere else in the world." Dad called next, his approach more direct. "You've always been the responsible one, Ellie. Stephanie needs this more than you do. She and James have their hearts set on starting their marriage in a beautiful home. Then they should work toward buying one like I did," I countered. My parents' intervention was just the beginning. Throughout the week, extended family members reached out with unsolicited opinions. Aunt Margaret thought I was being unnecessarily rigid. Cousin Thomas suggested I think of it as an investment in family harmony. Even my grandmother called to remind me that possessions are temporary, but family is forever. This coordinated pressure campaign had Stephanie's fingerprints all over it. She'd always been skilled at mobilizing allies while portraying herself as the victim. A week after the confrontation, Natalie forwarded me a social media post that confirmed my suspicions. Stephanie had shared a tearful selfie with the caption, "Wedding planning should be the happiest time of my life, but instead I'm dealing with heartbreak." Amazing how quickly someone can reveal their true character when your joy threatens their comfort. Families should support each other's happiness, not hoard it for themselves. #wedding nightmare, #broken promises. The post had hundreds of sympathetic comments, including several from mutual friends who didn't know the full story. When Natalie called to check on me, I finally broke down. Am I crazy, Nat? Am I missing something? Should I just give my sister the home I spent my entire adult life working toward? Absolutely not, Natalie responded firmly. This is classic Stephanie manipulation, just with higher stakes. She's always counted on you eventually giving in to keep the peace. The next escalation came directly from James. He called my office, somehow charming my assistant into putting him through despite my instructions to block their numbers. "Eleanor, I think we got off on the wrong foot," he began smoothly. "Stephanie can be emotional, and perhaps she presented our arrangement inartfully." "There is no arrangement," I stated flatly. "Let me be direct then." His voice hardened slightly. "We've already invested considerable resources based on the understanding that your property would be our wedding venue and subsequent residence. Vendors have been booked. Invitations have been mailed. Legal promises carry weight, Eleanor, even between family members." The thinly veiled threat sent a chill through me. I never made any legal promise, verbal or otherwise. Any understanding was entirely one-sided. "Witnesses might disagree," he replied. "Your parents, for instance, confirm you've been consistently supportive of our plans to use the property." After ending the call, I immediately contacted Marcus Jenkins, a real estate attorney who had handled contracts for my firm. His advice was reassuring but sobering. "Based on what you've told me, they have no legal claim," Marcus confirmed. "But that doesn't mean they won't attempt to create problems. Document everything from now on. No verbal agreements, no witnessed conversations." The situation deteriorated further when I discovered Stephanie had given my address to several wedding vendors. The florist called asking about delivery access. The caterer emailed regarding kitchen specifications. A tent company representative actually showed up unannounced to measure my lawn. When I confronted Stephanie by text, her response was breathtaking in its entitlement. "You're being dramatic. It's just a building. You can design another one anytime. It's literally your job. I've already put down non-refundable deposits based on using the villa. Are you really going to make me lose thousands of dollars over your stubbornness?" That evening, I met my parents at their home, hoping a face-to-face conversation might break through the madness. Instead, I walked into another ambush. Stephanie and James were already there, seated at the dining table like participants in an intervention. "We thought it would be good for everyone to talk together," Mom explained, avoiding my eyes. For 2 excruciating hours, I listened to increasingly irrational arguments. James suggested I could take a sabbatical in their current apartment while they lived in my villa. Stephanie proposed I could visit any time, as though offering access to my own property was a generous concession. Mom wondered if I could simply build them a replica elsewhere, apparently forgetting the years of work and millions of dollars involved. The breaking point came when Dad, who had remained mostly silent, finally spoke. "Eleanor, we've always been proud of your success. But success comes with responsibility to help those less fortunate. Stephanie hasn't had your advantages." "My advantages?" I repeated, incredulous. "I worked 3 jobs through college. I lived in a studio apartment and ate ramen for years to save for this house. What advantages are you referring to exactly?" The conversation deteriorated from there. I left feeling gaslighted and betrayed, not just by Stephanie, but by my parents who had rewritten history to justify the unjustifiable. The next morning, I received an email that Stephanie had accidentally copied me on. It was to her wedding planner, discussing plans to renovate the outdated guest bathrooms and modernize the kitchen in my villa after taking possession. Attached were mock-ups showing my carefully designed spaces gutted and replaced with generic luxury finishes. The email confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't about Stephanie needing a home. This was about her wanting my home specifically, the physical manifestation of my success that she could claim as her own. 3 weeks after the initial confrontation, James escalated the conflict to a new level. He arrived at my office unannounced, requesting a private business meeting. Against my better judgment, I agreed to hear him out, with my assistant instructed to interrupt after 15 minutes. James placed a document on my desk, a formal offer to purchase my villa for 20% below market value. "I'm prepared to be reasonable," he stated, as though making a generous concession. "This way, you recoup some of your investment, and we avoid unnecessary drama." "The property isn't for sale," I replied calmly. "Not to you, not to anyone." His expression hardened. "Stephanie is devastated. Her dream wedding is falling apart because of your selfishness. Do you realize how this makes you look to everyone who cares about you?" "I don't care how it looks," I said honestly. "This is about boundaries, not appearances." James leaned forward, dropping his pleasant facade. "Let me be perfectly clear. One way or another, that property will be our wedding venue. We've invested too much to change course now. The only question is whether you'll be remembered as the generous sister or the villain of the family." After he left, I called Marcus immediately. His advice was unequivocal. Change the locks, install security cameras, and document everything. "This has moved beyond family disagreement," he warned. "They're showing concerning determination to access your property with or without permission." I followed his advice that same day, contracting a security company for immediate installation. The decision proved prescient when, just 2 days later, Stephanie arrived with a photographer and wedding planner in tow. When her key didn't work, she pounded on the door, face contorted with rage when I answered. "You changed the locks? Are you serious right now?" "You're trespassing," I stated firmly. "Please leave." The photographer began taking pictures, causing me to step back inside. Stephanie wedged her foot in the door. "We're scheduled for pre-wedding photos today. The photographer is charging by the hour. You can't do this." "I didn't agree to any photo session," I replied, struggling to maintain composure. "You need to leave immediately." "After everything I've done for you," she shouted, attracting attention from neighbors. "I've supported you for years while you chased your precious career. I was there when Richard left you. I listened to every boring story about zoning regulations and building permits. This is how you repay loyalty." The raw jealousy behind her words suddenly clarified everything. This wasn't about needing a home. It was about taking mine. About claiming the physical representation of my success as her own. Stephanie, I said quietly, you've never been happy for me, have you? You've been waiting for me to fail, or at least to need you more than you need me. But that never happened, so now you're trying to take the one thing that represents my independence. Her expression confirmed my words had hit their mark. You think you're so perfect, she hissed. Miss Successful Architect with her fancy house and important clients. Some of us want family and connection more than empty achievements. This isn't about my career versus your choices, I replied. It's about respect. You don't respect me enough to accept that this is my home, not your wedding venue. You'll regret this, she threatened as the wedding planner tugged her arm, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. Family remembers who was there when it mattered. After they left, I collapsed on my sofa, physically exhausted from the confrontation. The security camera footage would prove valuable later, but in that moment, I was simply trying to process the magnitude of Stephanie's betrayal. The next day, my mother called to inform me that Stephanie had been hospitalized for exhaustion and anxiety related to wedding stress. The unspoken implication was clear. I was responsible for her condition. The doctor says she needs to avoid additional stress, Mom emphasized. Your father, and I think the kindest thing would be to reconsider your position on the villa. It was the final straw. Mom, I love you, but this has gone too far. Stephanie is attempting to claim my home through emotional manipulation. I won't participate in this dysfunction any longer. I ended the call and immediately blocked both my parents' numbers, needing space to think clearly without constant pressure. It was the first time in my life I'd set such a firm boundary with my family, and despite the circumstances, it felt surprisingly liberating. The turning point came from an unexpected source. A woman named Rachel contacted me through my firm's website, introducing herself as James's ex-girlfriend. I saw Stephanie's social media posts about your villa, she wrote. James did something similar with my family's lake house. He identifies valuable properties and pursues relationships with women connected to them. Please be careful. Initially skeptical, I agreed to meet Rachel for coffee. She brought documentation, emails, text messages, and legal letters, showing James had indeed attempted to claim partial ownership of her family's property through their relationship. When that failed, he'd become vindictive, threatening legal action based on verbal agreements and implied contracts. He targeted me after meeting my family at a charity event, Rachel explained. Within weeks, he was helping my parents with property management decisions and suggesting renovations. Sound familiar? Armed with this information, I began investigating James more thoroughly. His real estate development company, which he described as highly successful, showed multiple tax liens and pending lawsuits from contractors claiming non-payment. 3 previous business ventures had failed within 2 years. His family wealth, which Stephanie had mentioned repeatedly, appeared to exist primarily in carefully crafted illusions rather than actual assets. Most disturbingly, I discovered James had already shown my villa to potential investors as a pending acquisition for a boutique hotel conversion. The pieces suddenly fit together. This wasn't just about Stephanie wanting my home. It was about James identifying a valuable property he could potentially control through marriage to my sister. Whether Stephanie was a willing participant or another victim remained unclear, but the scheme itself was now unmistakable. This realization strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just protecting my property, I was potentially saving my sister from a predatory relationship. With Marcus's help, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter addressing both the unauthorized use of my address on wedding materials and the false claims about my property's availability. The letter was delivered to Stephanie, James, and copied to my parents, making my position legally clear to all parties. The response was immediate and explosive. Stephanie called from an unknown number, sobbing and raging alternately. "You're ruining everything," she cried. "The invitations are sent. The vendors are booked. Mom and Dad say you've lost your mind. Stephanie, I said firmly, I need you to listen carefully. I've discovered concerning information about James's business practices and previous relationships. I'm worried he's using you to gain control of my property. That's ridiculous, she spat. You're just jealous because I found someone who loves me while you drive everyone away with your ambition and control issues. Despite my attempts to share what I'd learned, Stephanie refused to listen. She ended the call with an ultimatum of her own. Fix this by the end of the week, or don't bother coming to the wedding. In fact, don't bother being my sister anymore. It was the most painful conversation of my life, but also clarifying. I couldn't save someone who didn't want saving. I could only establish boundaries and hope that someday Stephanie would understand. The weeks following my final conversation with Stephanie were painfully quiet. My parents eventually called from a new number, leaving voicemails that evolved from angry demands to reluctant acceptance of my position. I maintained my distance, needing time to process the profound betrayal I'd experienced from my closest family members. On Marcus's advice, I sent a final formal communication through certified mail. The letter clearly stated that my property was not available for any wedding-related activities, was not being gifted or sold to Stephanie and James, and that any further attempts to access the property without explicit written permission would be treated as trespassing. I included copies of the security camera footage showing Stephanie's unauthorized attempt to enter with the wedding vendors, as well as screenshots of James's false claims about acquiring my property for development. The evidence was indisputable and legally significant. 3 days later, my father requested a meeting, alone, at a neutral coffee shop downtown. I agreed, with Marcus joining as my witness. Dad looked older than I remembered, the strain of recent weeks evident in the new lines around his eyes. I owe you an apology, he began, surprising me with his directness. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I realize we've been unfair to you. He explained that he'd started questioning the situation after seeing my legal letter. Curious about James's business claims, he'd done his own investigation and discovered the same concerning pattern I had found. I confronted James about the discrepancies, Dad continued. His explanation was unconvincing. Then I found paperwork in Stephanie's apartment showing plans to convert your villa into some kind of boutique hotel. She claimed it was just an idea they were exploring for someday, but the documents were quite detailed. My father's voice broke slightly. We've enabled Stephanie's worst tendencies her entire life. I see that now. We thought we were helping her, but we were actually preventing her from developing the resilience and self-sufficiency you built on your own. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of how they'd contributed to the situation, but it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope for eventual reconciliation. The wedding has been moved to the Grand Harbor Hotel, Dad informed me. Your mother is helping Stephanie adjust her expectations. It's been challenging. I nodded, unsurprised. And James, still in the picture, though I've made my concerns clear to Stephanie. She's defensive about him, but I notice she's asking more questions about his business claims. That's progress, I suppose. We parted with a tentative plan to meet again the following month. It wasn't forgiveness, that would take much longer, but it was a first step toward a healthier family dynamic. The wedding proceeded without me. According to mutual friends who attended, it was elegant but noticeably scaled back from Stephanie's original vision. James appeared charming throughout, though several guests mentioned tension between him and my father. 3 months later, Natalie convinced me to attend a local architecture charity gala I'd normally have skipped. You've been hiding in your villa long enough, she insisted. It's time to rejoin the world. At the event, I met Daniel Mercer, an architectural historian whose work I'd long admired. Unlike most people I'd dated, he asked questions about my designs that went beyond surface compliments, showing genuine interest in my creative process. When I mentioned my villa project, he expressed curiosity without entitlement or agenda. I'd love to see it someday, he said, but only if you're comfortable sharing that space. Private homes are exactly that, private. His respect for boundaries was refreshingly attractive after months of having mine violated. We exchanged numbers, beginning a relationship that progressed slowly and respectfully. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email from Stephanie. The subject line was simply, "I'm sorry." The message itself was brief but significant. "I've been doing therapy. I realize now how wrong I was about the villa situation. James and I are separating. You were right about his motivations. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I regret my actions. Take care, S." I didn't respond immediately, needing time to process this development. A week later, my mother called to confirm that Stephanie had indeed filed for separation after discovering James had been pursuing multiple property opportunities through various personal connections. The 1-year anniversary of moving into my villa arrived during this period of cautious family reconciliation. I decided to host a small dinner gathering to reclaim the space that had been the center of so much conflict. I invited only people who had genuinely supported me. Natalie, Marcus and his wife, 2 close colleagues, and Daniel, who had become an increasingly important presence in my life. As we enjoyed dinner on the terrace overlooking the ocean, I realized something fundamental had shifted within me. The villa remained my sanctuary, but my sense of self no longer depended entirely on this physical structure. The past year had taught me that true security comes from within, from the boundaries we establish and the self-respect we maintain. 2 weeks later, Stephanie called, asking if we could meet. We chose a public park, neutral territory for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. She looked different, less polished, more authentic somehow. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she began. "I've been working through a lot in therapy." Over the next hour, Stephanie acknowledged patterns that had defined our relationship since childhood. She admitted to long-standing jealousy of my success and independence. Most importantly, she took responsibility for the villa scheme without deflecting blame to James, our parents, or misunderstandings. "I convinced myself I deserved your home because you had achieved so much else," she admitted. "I told myself you owed me because I hadn't had your opportunities, your talents. It was easier than admitting I needed to build my own life." Her apology wasn't perfect, but it was sincere. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness. That would come gradually, if at all. But I did suggest we might try rebuilding our relationship with clearer boundaries and expectations. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'm learning to stand on my own now. It's terrifying but also freeing." As I drove home afterward, I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months. The villa I'd fought so hard to create and protect had become more than just a physical structure. It represented a philosophical stance on what we owe others versus what we owe ourselves, on the importance of boundaries, even with those we love most. The following weekend, I invited my parents to the villa for the first time since the disastrous anniversary dinner. The visit was cautious but cordial, with unspoken acknowledgement that our family dynamic was permanently changed, hopefully for the better. That evening, I sat on my terrace watching the sunset over the ocean, Daniel quietly reading beside me. The infinity pool reflected the pink-orange sky, creating the seamless merger with the horizon that had nearly broken my budget and my spirit during construction. "Worth it?" Daniel asked, noticing my contemplative gaze. "Absolutely," I replied. "Not just the house, but everything it taught me about standing firm when it matters. I've learned that creating something meaningful, whether a building, a career, or a life, requires not just vision and hard work, but also the courage to protect it from those who would claim it without earning it. The most valuable structures in our lives aren't just the physical spaces we inhabit, but the boundaries that define who we are and what we stand for." Have you ever had to stand your ground against pressure from loved ones? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, Please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need encouragement to maintain their own boundaries. Remember, you're not selfish for protecting what you've worked hard to create. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you build something beautiful in your own life.